Story 1 by Reddit user UNC-Deb13. Native Americans in the northern wilds believe that a vengeful spirit inhabited the untamed wilderness, preying on man and beast alike. A spirit born of desperation and unspeakable sin that warped the bodies of the minds of those who would succumb and drive them to feast on their kin and whatever living things they could find. They called it a Wendigo. I couldn't have been older than 10 when my father took us hunting. My father, my older brother Bradley, and me hiking through the Yukon Trail like actual pioneers or fur traders. Bradley taught me a lot about tracking as we hiked, pointing out tracks in the mud and snow, broken branches, disturbances in the bush. Dad taught him, and he was teaching me. Dad always said it was because of the native blood in his veins that he preferred hunting off the trails and reserves. Looking back, I think it might just be because he didn't feel like paying for permits. We'd made it to the lodge we were staying in just before dusk. Any later would have probably been a death sentence for us, but I was too young to realize at the time. As we sat around the fireplace eating our ready-to-eat meals Dad always kept in stock, I couldn't get something from the trip out of my head that I'd seen on our way up the mountain. It almost looked like a man, but something was just off. It was misshapen, twisted, unnaturally skinny, and had to be at least 8 feet tall. It let out some kind of shrill, inhuman shriek before I watched its macabre, nude form bound off into the trees. Of course, I was the only one that saw it. Bradley and Dad both heard the call, but our dad said it was just an elk. I know what elks sound like, and that definitely wasn't it. This was something predatory, something guttural. My life wasn't the same after that trip. When we got home, I was absolutely consumed with what I'd seen. I even took to calling them Wendies affectionately. Every piece of media related to the legend, every historical documentation, every book, movie. There's very little I didn't study extensively. When I got a little older, I even joined a message board for cryptid sightings, but results were a lot less than I'd hoped to find. Crackpots and lunatics raving about Bigfoot and Chupacabra and bog beasts. Anyone who claimed to see a Wendigo was completely off their gourd, or their notes didn't line up. I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew what I saw. Eventually, I even moved to the Yukon after graduating, taking up residence in a cabin and working as a dispatcher for a bobcat rental service. I knew that I could be the one to find a real Wendigo and reveal it to the world. That was 30 years ago. The bobcats are gone, but I'm still here. Just me on the mountain range in my cabin. At least I can say I became quite the hunter, or else I'd have died years ago. Elk and rabbit have sort of a gamey taste, but when it's all that's around, you get used to it fast. I occasionally run into people at the trading stand located a couple of hours east, but that's usually the extent of my interactions with other people face to face, if hunters don't frequent the lodges that year. I couldn't tell you if Bradley's alive or dead. I'm pretty sure my dad must have died by now. Maybe that's why things went the way they did. But it had to happen. I had to be right. Had to be. What comes next, I need you to not judge me for. To someone removed from the situation, what follows is going to sound cruel, if not particularly gruesome. I'll admit it's never something I would have ever imagined myself doing when I was younger. And then again, I didn't think I'd do a lot of things. Always wanted to be a zoologist. I guess I still kind of am. Instead of a wife and a house, I had a cabin over an old storm cellar and a monster I hadn't seen for nearly 40 years. One could say that time sort of ravaged me or drove me insane. And maybe it did. Maybe it did. But it doesn't change what happened last spring. There was an early thaw last winter that gave way to a freak blizzard in what the hell was it? I want to say early May. I have trouble keeping track of the months sometimes. It's all seasons to me. Anyway, this wasn't the usual snowstorm. I've seen plenty on the range, but this was something else. This was something almost biblical. High winds, whiteout conditions, dangerously low temperatures. I was fine on supply for months and set to wait it out in the relative comfort of the cabin. Until I heard the damnedest thing. A chirp on my outside motion sensors. How these people found me, I have no idea. Half frozen to death, damn near breaking my door down. A man, a woman, 2 teenagers, all huddled in the snow. They didn't look well equipped at all for the white hell that was raining down on them, so I didn't really hesitate to bring them inside. My French isn't great, but I was able to gather that they were a family from Quebec that was doing some sightseeing and got caught off guard by the storm. They'd lost their way trying to navigate back to the camper and damn near died before they saw the light through my windows. They were mostly grateful to get in somewhere warm and lucky enough to find someone willing to share some food. Father Renard, Mother Janine, 13-year-old Benoit, and 15-year-old Gwen. They were all nice enough, happy to be alive. It got pretty clear that they were going to have to stay for a spell until the storm died down, and then they'd be able to navigate back. But Renard was able to show me a map where they were trying to get to. Turns out, they were a ways off. After the storm broke, I'd be able to lead them the several kilometers down their campsite, but they'd have to at least stay the night. There wasn't much room in the main cabin, but I had a few army cots sitting around and there was plenty of room in the cellar, so I had Renard and Benoit help me move a few things up into the storage closet and set them up down there. As I closed the hatch to give my guests some privacy, I got to thinking. In Wendigo legends, there's always something that causes the creature to come into being. Sometimes it's a curse, or they're born, or it's like a possession thing. But the most common source I've seen has always been one particularly gruesome thing. The act of cannibalism. Man eating man. The most horrific abomination man could think of. Here I was, in a remote cabin, 4 weary travelers far away from home, in a basement with one way in and one way out. Warning you now, this is where things start getting unpleasant, and the situation doesn't improve. Suffering wasn't something I wanted to cause, but it was going to have to happen. They were going to have to be desperate. Just before dawn, I threw a bucket down the steps, reclosed the hatch, and locked it down with an old tire chain and padlock. I could hear them through the floor, confused and startled. Janine made her way up the steps and discovered the hatch wouldn't move. From what I could hear, there was the sound of confusion giving way to anxiety. Renard came to the top and gave the hatch quite a shove, only to discover the chain. They did their best to yell and to speak to me, and I just kept acting like I couldn't understand them. After all, I didn't really speak much French. They must have thought I was crazy at first. I need to make it known that I did not take pleasure in what had to happen, but there's no undoing what happened. I tried to make the situation as pleasant as possible, given the circumstances. The bucket was for whatever bathroom needs they had, and I was still feeding them. Just not very much. They were on a liquid diet, all water and smoothies I'd make. From what I understood, it took around 3 weeks with no actual food for starvation to kill a person. Really, I was hoping it wouldn't take that long for one of them to give in and partake. But we had all the time in the world. Eventually, a search party would go looking for them, but we were far enough away from where they would look for them that we wouldn't be disturbed. I thought the worst part was going to be the screaming, but that mostly stopped by the 3rd day. No, the worst part I felt was the waiting. It was supposed to take 3 weeks, but I honestly lost track of the days and couldn't tell you how long they were down there. I don't know if I'd forgotten a stash of food down there, or if they were rationing, but they were holding on. Waiting for anything on weeks on end is torture, but waiting for people to die and eat each other, that's a whole nother animal. One morning, I accidentally found a way to expedite the process a bit. I popped the hatch up a bit to roll their fluids down, and Benoit's arm grabbed my pant leg and damn near gave me a heart attack. I'm not exactly sure what he was planning, but he was holding on as tight as his malnourished arm could hold. With my other foot, I stomped down on the hatch a good 2 or 3 times, breaking the boy's arm. He finally pulled it back in, and I could hear him screaming in agony after falling back down the stairs. The sound of his arm breaking under my foot was absolutely stomach-turning, and I had to turn up some music just to drown out his screams. His parents pleaded with me for medical attention, but there wasn't anything I could do. If they got out, the experiment would be ruined. It wasn't long at all before Benoit's injury became infected. He was a tough kid and held on for as long as he could, but nature took its course. When I heard Janine wailing one night, I knew he was gone. I figured he would be the main course, so to speak, and resolved to cut off their rations until they finally ate him. But then the smell kicked in a couple of days after he passed. It was absolutely putrid, coming through the floorboards, and I had to just dispose of him. I just couldn't handle the smell. I made my way down the steps with my hunting rifle and ordered the family to stand against the wall. They were definitely thinning, but they were holding on. When I realized I wasn't going to be able to drag the boy's body up the stairs by myself, I had to enlist Renard's help. One thing I'll say is that I absolutely respect Renard. That could not have been an easy thing to do, but he did it, for his family. We managed to get the body up the stairs and out the door, when he decided to try something stupid. Renard threw a punch that caught me across the jaw, but the force sent him stumbling over. I assumed it was the last of his energy going into that punch. When he struggled to his feet to swing at me again, I smashed him in the head with the butt of my rifle. It must have been too hard of a strike, because he immediately went down and started convulsing, with his feet twitching and feebly kicking around in the snow. I had fucked up this man beyond what I could repair at this point, and did the only merciful thing, shooting him in the head. As I stood in front of my cabin surrounded by melting snow and 2 dead captives, another idea crossed my mind. When my dad took my brother and me hunting, he insisted that we did our part in every step of our kill, from tracking and stalking to the actual killing, all the way to field dressing and processing. I discovered really quickly that processing a human being isn't that much different from a deer or any other big game. Less fur, different proportions, but the process and lot of the cuts are the same. I was hesitant about taking anything from Benoit, since his infection had obviously killed him, and I didn't know how it would affect the meat. Couldn't exactly risk the girls getting sick and dying. Fortunately, Renard still had some usable meat in him, despite being emaciated. I was able to get a few decent slices out of him, and then I got to work in the kitchen. Another day and a half passed before I peered down the hatch and laid out 2 bowls of stew. Gwen was clearly starving and nearly ate it before Janine smacked it from her hand, knowing immediately something was wrong. She demanded to know where her husband was, but of course, that was between me and him. After that, there were no more water or smoothies, just day after day of stew set on the top step. 4 days passed before hunger finally took over, and Janine stopped resisting Gwen's desire to put anything in her stomach. I don't know if Gwen just didn't know she was eating her father, or if she just didn't care at that point. Initially, I was disappointed to see that all Gwen had seemed to develop was a stomach bug, vomiting violently into their shit bucket. I was starting to lose hope. Had I wasted my life chasing a ghost story? Had I abducted and terrorized a family for nothing? These thoughts tortured me the entire day, until I started hearing what sounded like Gwen having a seizure in the cellar. The thumping and flopping gave way to some strange animalistic growling, with Janine weakly trying to comfort her daughter. The next morning it happened. I finally heard it. The sound I'd waited my whole life to hear again. The shriek of a Wendigo. I opened the hatch and investigated to see Gwen, or what used to be Gwen, nude, hunched over her mother's corpse, tearing pieces of the abdomen out and mindlessly eating them. Her body was warped, nearly skeletal, as she used her newly developed claws to tear chunks of flesh from Janine. Her head snapped in my direction with an unnatural quickness, shedding clumps of hair with each twitch. Her face had completely warped, with blood and sick covering the mouth of jagged fangs with flesh stuck between the teeth, and eyes that had gone from a dark green to a corpse-like pale blue. She lunged across the cellar at me, but I was able to dive back up the hatch and re-lock the padlock before she reached the top of the stairs. The chain was holding, but barely, as it fairly slammed against the trap door. Now I was faced with a conundrum that I hadn't thought of before. The Wendigo was real. I'd made it. But how the hell was I going to get it out of my house? I didn't stand a chance of fighting it off if I opened the hatch, and the chain wasn't going to hold forever, so time was a factor. I had to rely on its predatory instincts and pray it would go for an easy meal. Benoit was still in the shed, I remembered. He was putrid and beginning to bloat, but I doubted it was going to care at that point. I dragged the corpse into my living room, and it certainly sensed that there was food, as the slamming against the trapdoor got even more desperate. I positioned Benoit toward the kitchen nook, and then took a position behind the trapdoor where I unlocked a chain and took a step back as quietly as I could. It climbed out of the hatch, crawling around the room on all fours, sniffing aggressively, eventually making its way to its brother's body. From what I could tell, it didn't seem to be able to see that well. What used to be Gwen was aware of me, but seemed content with the easy meal for the time being. While the four-wheeler in the shed wasn't the ideal getaway vehicle, it worked out fine as I sped down the hill. As I drove down the trail, I was able to hear the distinct call of a Wendigo echo through the trees again. I stayed at the empty shack that housed the Bobcat rentals for 2 days, while I waited to make sure the Wendigo had left. And when I went home, it was gone. Only a bloody mess and what was most of a teenage boy's skeleton and blood trail leading to the trees. I'm not crazy. Wendigos are real, and I saw 2 in my life with my own eyes. I still hear it scream in the woods, and sometimes I even catch glimpses of it. I haven't gotten a picture yet, but I'm hopeful. Every now and again I'll find its handiwork, elk and other animals ripped to shreds. I don't expect her to move on anytime soon. What with hunting season starting soon on the mountain again, it'll have prey aplenty, and I'll be able to study it up close. It also seems drawn to my house, and likes to stay close by. Maybe it senses I'm food, or maybe it's drawn back from some vague memories of where it was born. Every so often I see it on the monitor when it comes close enough to set off a perimeter sensor, and every time I hear its guttural screech echo through the trees, I can't help but chuckle. Everyone knows it's Wendy. Before I continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you are, please show your appreciation by liking this video, leaving a comment, and if you don't already, subscribing to my channel. Story 2 by Reddit user Onyx_. OX. Every family member of mine, including myself, has had an encounter with the paranormal or supernatural at one point in their lives. From the little people that kept my great-aunt company as she lay dying in a hospital bed, to myself making successful contact with something through a Ouija board. But this I don't have an explanation for. Even as someone who believes in these things, I always try to ration the mundane over the magical. However, after delving into learning more about a certain mythological cryptid, I can only come to one conclusion surrounding my mother's passing in the spring of this year. I used to live in the mountains in Northern California with my mum, who was a single mother, and the place we stayed at was a house that was owned by my aunt. It was a historical house with well over 200 years of history on the property, and being rebuilt and altered through the decades. This house was situated in the thick of the wooded mountain, and the forest stretched for miles beyond. In the front ward was a wall about 3 foot high, and on top was a hill that inclined upwards back some 10 yards of grass that terminated at a fence. Beyond that was just woods and a small hiking trail. When we moved into this house, I was just starting first grade, and what I'm about to tell you has been happening regularly until we moved out when I was in middle school. My mum was also deeply spiritual and also believed in the supernatural, though I don't think she knew what she had possibly encountered. When I was sent off to school, my mum stayed back at the house to do paperwork for the ongoing custody battle. When she was alone or when it was out of sight was when it started happening. She would hear my voice shouting for her from the front yard, yet she knew that I was not home at that time, nor would I have been. The first few times it happened, she wrote it off as hearing things, since she is hard of hearing in one ear. The longer we lived there, the more seemingly uncomfortable the things we would feel or experience. I had never liked that house. I always felt like I was being watched in one way or another, especially outside, coming from just beyond the property fence. A few times she was with some family friends on the back porch that overlooked some sparse patches of forest in the valley. She would invite them over when I was at school still so that she can focus on relaxing. That's when she heard my voice again, calling to her from the wooded patch. This time, her friends also heard it. Confused, they asked my mum, shouldn't I have been at school at that time, and why was I playing outside in the woods? I wasn't, and she told them that. At the same time, around the times that my mum supposedly heard my voice, a foul smell would linger around the property. When I would come home or find my mum if I was off inside the house, my mum would keep asking me if I was really at school today, and I didn't just skip school. I always answered honestly that I was at school. The most vivid memory that my mum had of an encounter with an unwelcome friend on and around our property was one night in 2014. When I was in 4th grade, a magnitude 6 earthquake hit an adjacent county. Our property was very close to that county, and she was literally shaken awake. The bedroom we were sleeping in had a bed right next to a glass sliding door that faced to the backyard. She tried to wake me up, but I was a heavy sleeper. Then, she smelled that foul scent again. 2 yellow eyes in our backyard caught her eyes. As she stared at this intruder in our backyard, the aftershock hit. Thankfully, we were far enough away from the epicenter that the only damage done to the property was a crack in the tiles of the backyard deck, and also along the floor surrounding a pool we had. Another incident was that we used to keep chickens for eggs for a few months. We had the family handman build an automatic closing coop so that the door would close just before sunset, to keep the chickens safe from mountain lions and other things that would eat them. There was also a metal fence, not the chicken wire kind, but the heavy-duty ones that are used in construction sites, on all sides including the top to keep out the mountain lions, since a few were recently spotted in the nearby regional park. This was something that came from my own memory. First, it was just one chicken that ended up drowning at the bottom of our pool. After that, we put a padlock on the gate to the coop. Then, one late morning, I was out hunting for frogs in the pool filter when I saw my aunt, mum, and family handyman, the same one that built the coop, looking at the coop shocked and worried. The metal fencing of the coop of one safe had been completely ripped open, and inside, the coop was a bloodbath. I came to take a closer look at the scene when I heard the handyman say, "I'm not sure this was a mountain lion. None of the chickens are eaten or missing. The heads are all severed, and a mountain lion would have eaten these. They don't hunt and kill for fun." We also had no neighbours or people for at least a few miles that could have played this prank on us. And the thing I remembered most was not the dismembered chickens, but the smell of rotting flesh, even though the chickens looked like they were just killed the night before. Looking back, it felt like we were being taunted by this thing, or at least my mum was for some reason. When we still lived at that house, and even after we moved, misfortune followed us wherever we went. My mum got into a 5-year-long abusive relationship and developed breast cancer when I was in high school. She was a very healthy woman with no family history of breast cancer, and it would go away and come back just when she thought she was finally done with the chemo and treatment and all that. I had at some point in my teens gotten into cryptids, and specifically Native American folklore. If what I assume about her experiences are correct, I have heard that even if you evade death by a Wendigo, it will find another way to kill you. Doctors she would visit would express confusion, as she was low risk in getting breast cancer, let alone having it keep coming back since they caught it early the first time. Though we had long left that house, it felt like the memories, the fear, it was always following her. In her last months alive when I was with her, she said she kept having dreams of that old house, of my voice from beyond the woods, beckoning for her to come. Dreams about a thing that looked like a man but wasn't exactly, bearing the same yellow glowing eyes she saw outside the night of the earthquake. She felt as if those reoccurring dreams were trying to tell her something. She'd hoped it was good and not something malevolent. It did have my voice after all. Last year, in the fires, the house burned down. And this year in the spring, my mum passed away. Looking back, it feels like the pieces fit together for this. Everything from her diagnosis to how her cancer had behaved felt so off. It could be that she was cursed by this thing, or maybe there was no supernatural explanation. But it still lingers in the back of my mind. Thank you for watching and or listening to this video. Again, if you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button. And if you don't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. If you have a story you would like me to narrate, please email it to me at stories@daredeveril.com. I'm getting close to my next major milestone of 100,000 subscribers to this channel. Thank you to everyone who is continuing to subscribe to this channel and contributing to its growth by liking videos and leaving comments. Once I get to 100,000 subscribers, my plan is to reward you all with an epic video with over 3 hours of original content. It will probably be about Wendigos, as you all seem to love these stories. If that is the sort of thing you want to hear, please keep helping this channel to grow. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can buy me a coffee on my Ko-fi account, which I recently set up. It's still in the early stages of being set up, but I plan to release some exclusive content on there in the future. Check out my Teespring store and consider purchasing one of my shirt designs. I have a design with a dogman, a Wendigo, skinwalker and Bigfoot, all on a zebra crossing. It's a must for anyone that likes these types of stories. You can also head over to Audible, where there is the book Punch by J.R. Park that I narrated. I get a small royalty if you decide to purchase it. Thanks again for watching.